And that's why, as my palate cleanser, I go from a group of guys who are taking absolutely nothing seriously and just think everything's supposed to be a hoot. And then you go to the complete opposite end of the spectrum and watch the first part of the Undertaker documentary. And this guy is universally recognized and applauded and lauded and has made millions and millions of dollars by specifically taking his business and himself and what he does seriously, even in a work business where there's a lot of silliness that goes on. And they can't learn anything. And that's why Undertaker, 30 years after he was the Undertaker and after he was the biggest star in the business and blah, 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 and made a, now as he's riding off into the sunset, he's finally letting people see behind the fucking Undertaker to see who the real guy is. Because if he'd done it earlier, it would have spoiled it for everybody, for him, for the WWF, for the fans, for everybody. But now that he's pretty much done, the way that they did, and once again, it's like watching NFL films when the WWE really takes time on something and puts their best people on it. And they had a whole camera crew following him around for fucking 3 years or whatever, you know, not 24/7, 365, but you know what I'm saying. I mean, I used to work on wrestling promotions where you had one camera to shoot everything at television. And they have just the ability to send camera crews out with individuals. But it's like watching an NFL Films profile or something like that, or an HBO documentary on a fucking athlete, a guy who's been a star. And even though, yes, we finally reveal that he's a real person and not the dead man, the real person is still so fucking cool and fits with what the dead man was supposed to be. They managed to figure out a way to both expose the backstage workings of the business and still somehow give you a better respect for the guy in it. Because Undertaker does come off as a real human being that is also indestructible and will go through anything and sell nothing because he's so determined not to let himself down, not to let people down, not to make his business look bad. That to me was fucking the story they told there throughout the show of the things that he has had to go through to be who he wanted to be and who the people wanted him to be. You know, you don't see a guy like that doing a promo in the ring in front of national television audience talking to a fucking drone. Or I'm sorry, Chris. Or especially you don't see a guy like that fucking taking a dick flip, which would be even more egregious. But I thought they did a wonderful job as a television program and as a documentary. You got into Mark. And yes, even then, the Undertaker admitted that he lost confidence. But that somehow the way that they framed it, and just because it's him, and he's been able to carry off a lot of shit nobody else could have. But this wasn't to me, it didn't come off like the Stone Cold hugging Vince McMahon that killed Stone Cold, or Becky Lynch crying about being a maladjusted young girl with a dream that killed Becky Lynch. They made Undertaker almost like John Wayne in the movies. If John Wayne in the movies was real life, he fucking lost. He got outgunned one time and he had an out. He was concussed and didn't remember it. And then he was dissatisfied with himself. And then a lack of confidence was his draw really faster than the fucking young gunfighters. And then he comes back and later on he proves that he can still got it. They treated this seriously and they didn't insult the wrestling business by going behind it. They instead made one of the guys in it seem even more superhuman and gave people a respect for what the guys have to go through. There was nobody working with the Invisible Man or fucking, changing clothes in a goddamn ice machine. And I know people have said, well, Undertaker was supernatural and he'd call lightning bolts down. That's also one of those things. I said Mick Foley could get away with some things because he was Mick Foley. Taker, the people loved the spectacle enough, they'd buy the goddamn lightning bolt going at the fucking heel. Did he ever actually hit anybody with the lightning bolt and incinerate them? And they were dead and never came back? I don't fucking know. But he's just one of those people that because of what he put into a completely preposterous scenario, somebody even said it on the show. I don't know that Mark Calloway became the Undertaker or the Undertaker, which was kind of one-dimensional cartoon. The Undertaker kind of became more Mark Calloway. Mark Calloway met him in the middle. There was elements of both. It wasn't like this lively guy, because Mark was not a lively guy 30 years ago. He was quiet and he minded his own business, his own P's and Q's. And the gimmick at first was a little bleh and kind of, it could have been hokey like WWF stuff was. But Undertaker became more real and Mark Calloway became more of the Undertaker. And that's the only way I think he's been able to carry a lot of this shit off without looking hokey. Like, Ultimate Warrior was a over gimmick as fuck, did not age well 5 years later. A lot of the gimmicks didn't age well. You look back now and you're like, Taker, even when they changed him up a little bit, whatever, he's always been fairly badass. And it just works. That's one of those things. It just works. So even though they made him human, as some people were upset about, now's the time. It would have killed business and killed everybody if they'd have done it when he was working. But now it almost makes it better. Like he's more fascinating as a person than he was as the gimmick. And he wouldn't have been more fascinating as a person without the gimmick if it hadn't been for the 30 years of the things he's done to fucking get the gimmick over.
You've known him a long time. You brought him into WCW in 1990.
And to be honest now, let's give the credit to Dutch Mantell, because I'd never met the motherfucker, Mark Calloway. I never met him. I knew that Dutch had a 7-foot guy in Memphis he was booking. When we needed a skyscraper, I called him. I said, can we trust him? He said, I think he's going to be good. I said, okay. So it was Dutch's okay, but I was the conduit.
Well, you've known him a long time. Were you surprised to learn about the insecurities he felt in those last couple WrestleMania matches? And what were the big surprises for you in general watching this? What did you learn that you're like, oh my God, I'm surprised by this?
Well, I wasn't surprised about any of the things that were said. I was surprised about the magnitude of some of them. I knew, when everybody's known that he's had injuries and he's been working in pain, and that's why the limited schedule. And they even had the clip of him telling me and Jimmy Hart, they call me Santa Claus. And I say, you see me, I go, why, for a second? And then right as he said it, I only come out once a year. I got it. And cause I saw him look, and I bust out laughing because he's carrying that big bag, Santa Claus. I knew that, but I didn't know to the extent when you hear him say, yeah, this was my year. I'd trained for 3 or 4 months to get ready for WrestleMania. I'd do WrestleMania. I'd get surgery to fix whatever was fucking wrong, and then start training for WrestleMania again for 3 or 4 year period. That was bullshit to have to go through that with your life. I knew, just like anybody in that position, and especially as seriously as he's taken his business and as much as he's always tried to produce, I knew that obviously when he, over the last few years, when the matches got panned in a couple of instances, that he had to feel pressure to be the best, and he probably wasn't happy with himself for not being able to do what he could do. But I didn't know that it was going to that extent with him, that doubt, until finally, and then they end this episode with he's kind of had a great performance and redeemed himself. And the last WrestleMania they covered there on it, he said, well, he came back, he said, I could remember my name. He was telling Vince his name, because the one in fucking New Orleans or whatever in 2014, he doesn't remember anything after 3:30 that day. So I wasn't surprised that he would be stressed or concerned about something like that, but I was surprised to the extent that he admitted that it got to him.
Were you surprised by that clip of him, I guess maybe the afternoon before WrestleMania, just walking down the ramp, and you see how much difficulty he's having just walking, that his hips are bothering him that badly?
No, because I saw him 2 days before that walking the same way when I ran into him at the hotel in that clip. He was starting to walk like Ernie Ladd. at that point, toward the last year that Ernie was in Mid-South, 84, when he'd come in for shots and he was finishing up in the ring. He was doing a few things in the Carolinas and a few things in Mid-South. When he'd come in the locker room, he could stand straight up, but he couldn't walk straight up. He was bent over slightly, and his knees were always bent slightly because of, the condition that they were in. And he'd kind of lope along a little bit sideways where one shoulder would be lower than the other. And they're both 6'9". So Mark wasn't all the way over there like that yet. And his knees don't look like Ernie's did by a long shot. But God, that was the worst part for me, watching them give him the fucking, I guess it was cortisone shot in the knee, or some kind of even heavier duty painkiller. But I've had shots in the knee, and I've had the knee drained, blood drained out of the knee with a syringe, and you don't want anybody to do that to you unless you have no other choice.
The match with Lesnar, where he got concussed, he doesn't know when in the match it happened, and he forgot his name, and he was obviously in bad shape after that match. Famously, Vince McMahon left WrestleMania to go to the hospital with him, which they talk about in this documentary. What do you think, because you were around for a few years there, what do you think about the relationship between Vince and The Undertaker? I mean, he's the one guy who didn't go to WCW.
Yeah.
He was a Vince McMahon, maybe the best gimmick Vince McMahon ever created.
Yeah.
What can you say about the relationship between Vince and Taker?
They've always, the whole time I was on the creative team, I don't recall Vince ever, I won't say I never saw a crossword, but Vince ever intimating that he had a crossword with Undertaker, or ever intimating that Undertaker shouldn't have done anything, or I wish he hadn't done that, or that Undertaker was in any way a problem in negotiations, or, a problem with schedule or whatever. There was never, that's why it started early. By the time the Attitude Era was around, Taker had matured into that. I don't mean matured as a human being. He was already a grown adult, but I mean matured into a main event personality that was always going to be featured and was really hitting his stride as far the matches with Yoko. Because let's face it, Undertaker versus Giant Gonzalez, not a fucking classic.
No.
But the first few years, Taker had to do what he was told to do, which was to work like that, the movie monster kind of thing. But two things happened. Number one, business went down, and Taker started taking it more upon himself to get over more and to work harder and to try to, shoulder a lot more of the responsibility. And secondly, all of a sudden now with Yokozuna to work against, where you've got a guy that can be physically competitive, realistically, legitimately in the people's eyes with Taker. He could do more stuff, the flying clotheslines. And then by 96, when he's working against Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels and those guys, then all of a sudden, because Taker was never about, I don't say the person, but the Undertaker match was never about match quality the first couple of years, because he was still doing the gimmick the way Vince wanted it. When he became able to get away with showing more of what he could do and got opponents that could go and the whole thing just nipped up, then Taker was, his surge to not only 4-star matches, but really the top of the cards and recognized as a great worker rather than a great gimmick took place 96, 97, 98, that era, when he started turning it on. And then it became a thing he had to do where, every time, then he'd get a Brock, and then he'd get an Edge, and then he'd get an Orton, and now all of a sudden it's been 20 years. He's still got to have those fucking barn burners. That's, that was the price he paid. But no, like I said, besides that, just seeing the knee, whole thing and seeing what, he was having to put his body through, it's amazing. And I'm surprised he got concussed and doesn't know where it happened in the match with Brock, but he did that dive over the top on the cameraman, came down right on his fucking head and lived and remembered it. That one was, every time I see that, that's fucking horrible. Can you imagine being almost 7 feet tall and 300 pounds and coming from 12 feet up in the air head first to the concrete floor? What goes through your mind the fucking, last couple of seconds there? It's like, well, this is not going to end well. But they came out and said it. Mark has, and he came out and said it. How can I get my job done, give the people what they want to see, be who I'm supposed to be, and not, embarrass myself, embarrass the company, and that includes, I'm sure Mark Calloway has drunk enough beer or fine adult beverages to float a battleship, but he's never been drunk on the job. He's never been impaired on the job. He's never been impaired or out of sorts in a public appearance where he was, even if he just had to stand there and be the Undertaker, he never cast bad light on the company or on the business in general. And, I think I can't wait to see more of it. I'm going to watch all of these now, which I've been meaning to watch Ruthless Aggression because I want to see more of that, but I haven't had the time. But I will make time to watch more of The Undertaker because this thing was done so well, so seriously. He could be a fucking NFL football player. You wouldn't have any more respect for the fucking guy.
What'd you think of Michelle McCool? I thought she was a very, very supportive wife.
Yeah, she did a great job, and she's well-spoken. And, she kind of conveyed a lot of what, she saw him go through without him having to be, the guy to complain about it. That was a good spot for the wife to have because she sees it all the time. And, like when she said, yeah, he got fired at second-degree burns. He's pouring water on himself in the fucking pod, but he doesn't complain. That's why if it hadn't been for Taker and Mick Foley and a couple of those guys there, I would have gone absolutely out of my mind in that land of fucking lunatics with all the head cases and attitude problems and the clique and the whole 9 yards that they had during all that time. At least you knew those guys were prospering and you had somebody to go to, Austin and Rock and Taker and Foley and those, competent professionals when, if the other guys fucked up, you had somewhere to go.
So you're definitely going to watch episode 2.
I got to now. How many episodes is this going to be?
I don't know. I think it'll be at least a few.
Well, they said it covers from 2017 to 2020, so I can't wait to see what happens next.